Joe Budden super violates Ice and calls him ugly.
I'm gonna be honest with you. This was a risk for me because I hated cameras. I never was a fan of none of that.
And he was
I hated
mad
attention
uglier
and
when he
hated
first
cameras
got here.
and all that. And I still got him though.
Well, that's facts.
Okay.
I
No. We're gonna put a couple things to bed though.
And he was ugly as hell
Yeah,
when
he
first
was.
got here.
No, he was.
Blowing ants off of the microphone.
No, he was though. He was. That ain't stopped nothing though.
You saying, well,
But everybody else can answer the
Yeah.
question though. Let's keep the conversation
What?
going.
On a recent episode of the Joe Budden podcast, Joe Budden made fun of Ice yet again. Now, this whole exchange comes down to Joe Budden just saying that, hey man, before you got here, you was ugly, down bad, and I made you something. And maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong, but he's referencing the beginning of Ice's time on the show. You remember that first episode where he wore a Rugrat hoodie and everybody was roasting him in the comments section for his questionable fashion choices? Well, that's what Joe is talking about. But I think this exchange also highlights a common theme I've been spotlighting on this channel: sensitivity. As the conversation starts to get too, roasty, Ice says, all right, we could move on. We could kind of go ahead. And I think that reflects that Ice does not like to be made fun of. You also see Ish smirking as he likely notices that Ice feels uncomfortable and he doesn't want to chime in. I do sometimes wonder if Ish will ever chime in because Ice likes to chime in when people make fun of Ish, and it's happening more and more on the podcast. Also, I want to zoom out to something Ice said in this exchange. He said, coming on the show was tough for him because he didn't like cameras and he didn't like all of this stuff before. And I'm like, man, were you part of the Sinaloa cartel? Sometimes I think Ice over exaggerates how he was on the podcast because it's common podcasts. Like, people film you, people do stuff, and you're not a criminal figure. Because if you remember, he was obvious. It wasn't that just that he was a troll. People literally thought Ice was part of BMF. If you listen to what Taxstone said in this interview with Big Loon.
If my memory is correct, this is what he did. His name was officially Ice, and I think it was Free BMF. He was always often took BMF a lot. So it was like people kind of thought he was affiliated with them at some point. So that's how he gained his identity on the internet.
So now that he's on the podcast for about 4 years, it shows a severe contrast in what I thought Ice was versus what he actually would become. In many ways, his arc reminds me of a less talented Charlemagne. There was this pre-existing time when Charlemagne was a troll, sniffing seats, making Lil Mama cry. Everybody was upset. And then after that, he went through a rebrand. Ice, very similar. He was a troll, and then he went through a rebrand on the podcast. So overall, now that he's on the show, one has to wonder if it's genuine or if he's just trying to make sure he doesn't get the backlash that is coming his way. But let me know what you think about this exchange with Joe Budden. One of the other themes that I feel like should be spotlighted here is this idea that Joe likes to lay out. You guys, until I brought you here, you weren't the kings that I made you. And I think even though it's wrong to point out, it's actually true. Joe has said on previous episodes that he is a kingmaker. And I guess he's a kingmaker on that show because a lot of folks haven't really transcended past the Joe Budden podcast outside of Rory Mall. And it remains to be seen if Ish and Ice will ever establish footing beyond the walls of that Jersey studio. But if you look at Melissa Ford, she was, to me, at the time, not in a good spot. And if you look back and you remember when Melissa Ford said on More on Mel, it's a Patreon episode, that she didn't know where she was at. She didn't know what she was doing. And Joe Budden suggested that she come to Jersey and do his podcast. And now that she's on the podcast, she's the most visible she's ever been in her career since, her high profile dating with dudes like Reggie Bush and the Jason Lee show. But the Jason Lee show, Hollywood Unlocked, was never as big as the Joe Budden podcast. So this is the most visible Melissa Ford has been in her career since her Video Vixen days. Then there's Queen's Flip. Queen's Flip obviously admits that when he was down bad, right? He was having tax issues. There was some type of Patreon thing that he did that he didn't report. And the IRS was like, whoa, buddy, we need that money. And Flip positioned to be on the show. He's also the most visible he's ever been in terms of, the last few years. He's able to use the money from the Joe Budden podcast to bankroll the growth of Flip the Network, which stalled out shortly before his arrival. Then we have Ish. Ish goes on other platforms and does great views. Probably the best views of everybody else who goes on other platforms. Right? Ish can go and talk about the gender wars and get 100,000 views on Bag Fuel or some random lady's podcast. Ice, I don't know about Ice. Ice has still yet to prove that he has any type of value outside of the Joe Budden podcast, and I don't think he wants to. I think that he just wants to get as much money as he can, and when this podcast run is over, he's gonna go back to a regular job and live the life that he wants to. But then we have Mark Lamont Hill. This guy was in broadcasting for 25 years. He went through a lot of ups and downs, most notably when he made those comments on CNN that low key, well, maybe high key, got him blackballed. But now that he's back on the Joe Budden podcast, there are people viewing him a certain way. One of the cool kid, like, oh, this guy can go into a room with the top podcaster in the field for obviously this subset of podcasts, those built around personalities, and completely kill it. I mean, he's just kind of doing his thing. So Joe Budden, even in ways we don't want to admit, is a kingmaker. And some of the ways he goes about doing that is by elevating his cast members. Yes, this is a week of people saying that he just made a crazy joke about Imani, but there's also character building that Joe Budden actively does on the podcast. When he says things like Big Freeze, Big Ish, or talks about how Ish was bagging chicks by doing dice, and he would have girls blowing on his dice when he was there was a story he told once in the early days of Ish's time on the show that Ish was at a party and he had someone's girl blow on his dice when he was playing dice. And I know that story seems pretty innocuous, but it just, to me, illustrates how Joe builds other people's characters in the Joe verse. And that is what was at the core of this interesting exchange between Ice and Joe Budden. But let me know what you think. Do you feel like Ice looked uncomfortable? Like I said earlier, I think he did. He wanted to move on from that subject, and even, just looked uncomfortable. And that's one of the dangers of doing these types of podcasts is you bare your soul to the world, you share things, and you could look a little crazy. All right. With that said, follow me on Instagram, The Stop TV. Follow me on Twitter, The Stop TV. Follow me on Patreon, The Stop. This is Danny from The Stop. Peace.